The ocean does not forgive. One mistake, one wrong turn, and a man can vanish into its endless blue silence. On November 17th, 2012, a small fishing boat left the coast of Mexico with 2 men aboard. Within hours, it would be caught in a storm so violent it ripped apart everything they thought they knew about survival. What began as a simple fishing trip would transform into one of the longest and most unbelievable ordeals in human history. 438 days adrift on the Pacific Ocean. Imagine it. A year and 2 months, alone, at the mercy of waves taller than houses, with no land in sight. Could anyone endure such torment and live to tell the tale? This is the story of José Salvador Alvarenga, the man who refused to die. José was a hardened fisherman, accustomed to long days under the blazing sun and the merciless pull of the sea. He had made countless trips before, battling rough weather and razor-sharp uncertainty. On this particular morning, he was joined by a young companion, a 22-year-old man named Ezequiel Cordoba. Together, they carried with them the standard tools of survival: a few knives, fishing gear, a small motorboat just over 7 meters long, and a cooler packed with ice. Their plan was routine: head out from Costa Azul, catch enough shark, marlin, and mahi-mahi to sell, and return home in less than 2 days. But nature had other plans. The Pacific, that vast and unpredictable giant, shifted mood almost without warning. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon. Winds howled with a force that shredded the air. Within hours of departure, the sea transformed into a nightmare of towering waves and driving rain. José and Ezequiel tried desperately to steer back to shore, but the storm was merciless. Salt water flooded the small boat. Their ice chest shifted violently, nearly tossing overboard the little food and supplies they had. Radio calls for help went unanswered. The coastline was gone. The storm had swallowed them whole. What do you cling to when the world beneath your feet turns liquid and the sky above you threatens to tear apart? For José and Ezequiel, there was no choice but to fight. They lashed gear together. They bailed water until their arms burned. Hours bled into a day, then another. When at last the storm began to quiet, they looked around and realized they were alone. The land was nowhere to be seen. The ocean stretched in every direction, an infinite mirror of blue. Their engine was dead, their radio broken, and the wind had carried them hundreds of miles from the shore. In that moment, a truth settled on them like a shadow. They were lost. 2 men, 1 fragile boat, and an ocean wide enough to erase them without a trace. The calm after the storm was deceptive. The sea no longer roared with thunder, but silence brought its own terror. The horizon was endless. No land, no ships, only the slow rise and fall of swells stretching into forever. For José and Ezequiel, the reality of their situation settled in like a cold weight. They had no working motor, no way to call for help, and only the barest scraps of food. What had begun as a simple fishing trip had turned into a fight against the void. The first days tested them in ways they had never imagined. Their cooler, once filled with ice and bait, became a lifeline. They ate what little food they had drawn: fish, the last scraps of bait, even birds that landed on the boat in careless exhaustion. Salt water was everywhere, glistening, abundant, and deadly. Drinking it meant madness and death. Instead, they tried to catch rain. They stretched close across the open sky, prayed for storms, and licked droplets off surfaces whenever the heavens opened. Sometimes rain would come, pouring life into their desperate hands. Other times, Weeks pass beneath a pitiless sun. The Pacific has a way of erasing time. Days blurred into nights, and nights into mornings that felt the same. Their bodies began to weaken, skin blistered under relentless sunlight, their lips cracked, bleeding with each word. Hunger gnawed at them, sharp and constant. Still, they fought. They caught fish with their bare hands. They tore apart turtles that wandered too close. José, the older of the two, relied on instinct and grit. He had faced danger before, though never like this. Ezekiel, younger, less hardened, struggled more visibly. He questioned. He doubted. At night, he whispered fears into the dark. One question haunted them. Would anyone even know they were gone? Boats vanish at sea every year, never to be seen again. Friends back on land might wonder, but after weeks without contact, people move on. Rescue seemed unlikely. The ocean, after all, hides its secrets well, yet in that endless blue, hope was a fragile currency. Each morning, they scanned the horizon. Each flicker of light, each distant shadow might be a ship. They shouted. They waved. But time and again, no one saw them. Vessels passed too far away, silhouettes swallowed by the curve of the earth. The Pacific had made them invisible. Still, José held on to a stubborn belief. Survival was possible, as long as they kept fighting. But the sea had only begun its cruel test. The boat drifted without anchor, carried by unseen currents that twisted them farther into the belly of the Pacific. Days passed, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. At night, the stars stretched endlessly overhead, brilliant and sharp, as if mocking the two men below who clung to life in a world without direction. José often found himself staring at constellations, wondering if anyone on land was looking at the same sky. Unaware of the nightmare unfolding out here, their small vessel was fragile. With no shade except for makeshift coverings from torn clothing, they roasted under the heat. Blisters turned into open wounds. Their bodies swelled with salt sores. Each movement ached, yet still they labored to keep the boat afloat. Sharks began circling grey shadows, slicing beneath the surface. At first, they came curiously, bumping the sides of the boat. Then, hungrier, they lingered longer, as though waiting for weakness to tip into surrender. José and Ezekiel fought them off with oars and fists, screaming at the predators as if rage alone could hold death at bay. Hunger twisted their stomachs, and when they could not catch fish, they swallowed jellyfish or chewed on raw turtle flesh. The taste was bitter, slimy, revolting. Yet hunger made all food sacred. Drinking water was even more precious. They collected it in makeshift containers, sometimes mixing fish blood with rainwater when desperation grew unbearable. Each swallow burned with the reminder of how close they lived to the edge of survival, and then came the hallucinations. Heat and exhaustion bent their minds. Some days, Ezekiel swore he saw land-green hills rising just beyond the horizon. He begged José to paddle, insisted salvation was close. But as they strained toward it, the vision dissolved into waves. Other nights, José dreamed of feasts waiting at home, only to wake with an empty mouth and salt crusted on his skin. The mental toll was worse than the physical. Loneliness was an enemy of its own. In the silence between waves, thoughts became sharp and cruel. They wondered how long it would take before their families accepted they were gone. Would anyone find their bodies, or would the sea swallow them whole, leaving only memories? Still, each day they lived. Each morning they forced themselves to rise. to catch, to eat, to wait. Survival was no longer measured in weeks or even days. It was measured in breaths, in sips of water, in moments stolen from the vastness of death. Weeks turned into months, and the drifting boat became their entire world. The line between survival and madness grew thinner with each passing day. The ocean was not only vast, it was mercilessly repetitive. The same horizon, the same waves, the same grinding hunger. Time ceased to feel human. It stretched, warped, and pressed down like a weight too heavy to bear. José tried to impose routine, a fragile order against the chaos. He urged Ezekiel to keep moving, to fish, to talk, to keep their minds occupied. But the younger man's spirit began to unravel. His body grew weaker, his eyes hollow. He spoke often of home, of his family, of meals he longed to eat again. At times, he refused food, saying the struggle was pointless. José fought to encourage him, forcing him to swallow bites of raw fish, insisting the survival was possible. But despair had already taken root. The sun was relentless. It bleached their skin, cracked their lips, and burned their eyes, until even opening them against the light was agony. Salt sores spread across their bodies, oozing raw. Each shift of position scraped pain into their flesh. The ocean offered no comfort, only more trials. Sharks circled often now, patient and watchful. One wrong move, and they would be dragged into the depths. It was during this time that Ezekiel's strength finally began to fail. Weeks of malnutrition, dehydration, and despair had carved him down to a shadow of the man who had stepped onto that boat. He spoke less, stared more at the sky, and whispered prayers into the dark. José begged him to fight. He promised him they would see land again. He swore that every breath was worth the agony. But hope cannot be shared if the heart refuses it. One morning, José awoke to silence. Ezekiel lay still, his thin frame motionless against the wooden floor of the boat. He had slipped away quietly in the night, surrendering to the ocean without a final word. The shock tore through José like a blade. He shook him, cried out, tried to wake him, but there was no response. The realization struck hard. He was alone now. Utterly, devastatingly alone. And the cruelest decision of all remained. In the suffocating heat, José could not preserve the body. He faced a choice no human should ever face. Keep Ezekiel with him, or commit him to the sea. With trembling hands and a broken spirit, José let the waves take his companion, whispering a final prayer as the ocean closed over him. The boat that once carried 2 men now held only 1. Alone, adrift, with 400 days still to come. The silence after Ezekiel's death was unbearable. The absence of another voice, another heartbeat, left José in a void deeper than the ocean itself. The days felt longer, the nights colder, the horizon even more merciless. He spoke to himself, to the sky, even to the circling seabirds, just to keep the sound of words alive. Loneliness became his fiercest enemy, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. But José refused to surrender. He told himself he must live not just for his own sake, but for the family he hoped still prayed for him. He anchored his mind to small rituals. Every morning he scanned the horizon for ships. Every afternoon he fished. Every evening he stored what he could and prepared for the night. His world was reduced to these tasks, a fragile shield against madness. The sea, however, offered constant reminders of his fragility. Storms returned, battering the boat until it seemed certain to shatter. Waves rose higher than buildings, crashing with a force that nearly flipped him into the abyss. José tied himself to the boat with ropes, clinging as rain poured and lightning split the sky. He survived not by conquering the sea, but by enduring it one storm, one night, one breath at a time. And yet, there were moments when the ocean seemed almost merciful. Shoals of fish gathered beneath his boat, offering food when starvation loomed. Sea turtles appeared, their shells glistening under the sun, providing both meat and fresh blood to keep him alive. Rain would fall when thirst pushed him to breaking. These small mercies were lifelines, but each came with the cruel reminder. They were not salvation, only delay. José's body shrank under the strain. His hair grew wild, his beard tangled, muscles wasted, leaving him gaunt, his ribs sharp beneath weathered skin. Still, he clung to life with a ferocity that defied reason. He had survived storms, hunger, thirst, and the death of his companion. Now, he was entering a new stage of his ordeal, the long, grinding stretch of days with no end in sight. How long could a man live in such conditions? How many days could he mark before hope gave way to despair? José did not know, but he whispered to himself in the silence, promising he would not give the ocean the victory it craved. He would fight, no matter how long it took. The sea had taken one life. It would not take his. The days after Ezekiel's death blurred into a haze of grief and survival. Alone now, José Salvador Alvarenga drifted deeper into the Pacific, swallowed by a silence broken only by the slap of waves and the cries of seabirds. He had no one left to talk to, no one to share the burden of despair. But still, he endured. Each sunrise was a challenge. Each sunset was a victory. Solitude pressed against him like a second skin. The Pacific stretched endlessly, and José's mind became both his refuge and his tormentor. He talked aloud to imaginary companions, replayed memories of home, and even scolded himself for mistakes long past. In the absence of human contact, the mind invents. It fills the void. Some days he laughed to himself. Other days, he screamed into the wind, a primal roar to remind the ocean that he was still alive. Food remained a daily battle. Fish were not always plentiful, and the ocean's generosity was unpredictable. When birds landed, he snatched them with calloused hands, biting into raw flesh that dripped warm and metallic on his tongue. When turtles surfaced, he captured them, thanking them before breaking their shells open for sustenance. He drank rainwater when the sky offered it. When it didn't, he pushed himself to the edge of madness, lips cracking, throat burning, waiting desperately for clouds to gather. Storms remained both curse and blessing. They threatened to capsize his fragile boat, battering it with walls of water and winds that howled like demons. Yet, from those storms came precious rain, collected in every container, every scrap of cloth, every hollow of the boat. He clung to life by these gifts, never knowing if tomorrow would offer the same mercy. José's body continued to wither. His hands grew rough and claw-like, scarred from salt and labor. His skin hung loose, burned and battered. But inside him, a fire still burned. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was faith. Or perhaps it was the simple refusal to let the ocean win. Each night, as the stars appeared, José whispered to himself the same promise: I will live, no matter how long it takes. I will live. As weeks turned into months, José's drifting world became a prison of repetition. Every morning he scanned the horizon, every afternoon he fished, Every evening he prayed. Yet despite the grinding sameness, danger lurked in unexpected ways. His greatest enemy was no longer the storms or even the sharks. It was the mind. Loneliness began to unravel the edges of his sanity. He started seeing shapes on the horizon, islands rising where none existed. He reached out to shadows in the waves, thinking they were people, only to blink and find emptiness. The brain, deprived of human contact, began to invent what it needed most. He argued with invisible companions. He replayed conversations from his past, word for word, sometimes forgetting whether they were memories or dreams. Was he losing his grip? Or was this the only way to survive? At times, hallucinations gave him strength. He saw his daughter's face, smiling in the starlight, urging him to keep breathing. He heard the voices of friends calling across the wind, reminding him that life still waited. But the illusions cut both ways. When the mirages vanished, they left behind an even heavier silence. A silence that threatened to crush him. His body reflected the toll. Ribs jutted out like scaffolding, muscles wasted away, and his hair grew wild, matted with salt. Every wound, every blister risked infection. There were no medicines, no bandages, only salt water to sting and burn. Yet his body adapted in strange ways. He learned to swallow raw meat without gagging. His stomach hardened against spoiled fish. He discovered that turtle blood, though foul and bitter, could keep him alive when thirst threatened to end him. The ocean, vast and indifferent, gave him strange companions. Dolphins sometimes swam alongside the boat, their sleek bodies slicing the waves with effortless grace. They stayed for hours, sometimes days, before vanishing again. To Jose, they became symbols of hope, reminders that life still thrived out here, even in the emptiness. He spoke to them, thanked them, begged them to stay. But the most haunting question lingered every night as he stared at the sky. Was anyone even searching for him anymore? A man adrift on the Pacific was less than a needle in a haystack. He was invisible, carried by currents that obeyed no map. Hope of rescue seemed like a cruel illusion. And yet, somehow, Jose refused to give in to despair. He would not surrender. Not to the silence. Not to the loneliness. Not to the sea by the 4th month adrift. Jose's survival was no longer a matter of chance, but of instinct honed razor-sharp by necessity. He had become a creature of the ocean, adapting to its cycles, anticipating its moods. Yet the sea remained unpredictable, forever testing him with new trials. Food, though always scarce, revealed patterns he learned to exploit. Schools of small fish sometimes gathered in the boat's shadow, seeking shelter. With swift hands, he scooped them from the water, their bodies slippery and frantic in his grasp. Larger fish were trickier, but hunger sharpened his patience. He fashioned crude hooks from bits of metal, tying them with frayed cords, baiting them with scraps. The victories were small but vital. Each bite of raw flesh, though repulsive at first, became a gift, a reminder that he could still fight back against death. Yet survival came at a price. His digestive system rebelled. Some days he doubled over in agony, stomach twisting from spoiled meat or contaminated water. The sea turtles he managed to catch saved his life, but consuming them left him drained and weak, forcing his body to endure what it was never meant to handle. Every swallow was a gamble between nourishment and suffering. The sun was unrelenting. At midday, the heat rose so fiercely that the boat's surface scorched his skin. He tried to fashion shade from scraps of clothing and the remains of plastic containers, but the relief was minimal. Blisters covered his body, and his eyes stung from constant exposure. Sometimes he cooled himself by slipping into the water, clinging to the side of the boat. But each dip came with a new terror. The sharks, they circled often now, drawn by the smell of blood when he cleaned fish or turtles. Their dorsal fins sliced water, a silent reminder of how quickly life could end. One misstep, one slip, and the sea would claim him. He fought the temptation to linger in the water too long, knowing the predators waited patiently. Despite the suffering, José discovered moments of strange beauty. At night, the stars lit the ocean in silver fire. Bioluminescent plankton shimmered beneath the waves, turning the dark into a glowing dreamscape. In those hours, he felt a connection to something larger than himself, a universe, vast and cruel, yet also filled with wonder. He whispered prayers of gratitude, even as his body ached with hunger. Still, the question never left his mind. How much longer could this continue? Each passing day was both a victory and a sentence, carrying him farther from land, farther from the hope of rescue. And yet, as the boat rocked gently beneath the stars, José repeated his vow. He would not die here. The 5th month brought José to the edge of collapse. His body, already thin and battered, was wasting away. His movements slowed, his strength faded, and every task, fishing, collecting rainwater, even sitting upright, felt monumental. He wondered if his body would simply stop one day, refusing to rise with the sun. Yet each dawn, he forced himself to move. To stop, he knew, was to die. Storms struck again, sudden and merciless. The Pacific could change in moments, from calm glass to violent chaos. One storm in particular nearly ended him. The sky blackened, and winds tore at the sea with monstrous force. Waves slammed into the boat, drenching him in icy water, threatening to overturn the fragile vessel. José tied himself with rope once more, clinging to survival as thunder roared and lightning split the heavens. Hours passed, and still the storm raged. He shouted into the wind, begging for mercy, his voice lost in the howl. By morning, he was still alive, but barely. The storm had stripped away what little supplies remained, scattering containers and tools into the abyss. In the days that followed, despair settled over him like a shroud. He stared at the endless horizon and felt the crushing weight of time. How many days had passed? How many months? His mind struggled to keep count. He scratched tallies into the boat, but even those marks began to blur together, symbols of a time that no longer obeyed human rules. And yet, there were signs of life beyond his suffering. Seabirds became a kind of calendar, their migrations hinting at distant islands, though none ever appeared on the horizon. Once a large cargo ship appeared, a speck against the endless blue. José screamed, waved, even used mirrors to reflect sunlight. For a moment, hope surged through him like fire. But the ship passed without slowing, blind to his desperate cries. He collapsed afterward, broken by the cruel reminder of how invisible he truly was. Despite crushing loneliness, José began to lean into faith more deeply. He prayed constantly, sometimes whispering words, sometimes just letting his thoughts drift upward. He asked for strength, for endurance, for the chance to see his family again. Faith became his anchor, the only weight strong enough to tether him against the drifting void. But survival was not only physical or spiritual, it was also psychological. To combat madness, José forced himself to remember details from home. The sound of his daughter's laughter, the smell of tortillas cooking, the feel of warm earth beneath his feet. These memories became his treasure, sustaining him when the sea offered nothing but despair. Even as his body failed, his will grew harder, sharper. The ocean would not claim him, not yet. By the 6th month, José had become more ghost than man. His face was hollow, beard tangled, eyes sunken and rimmed with salt. His clothing had rotted into scraps, offering little protection from the blistering sun by day and the biting cold at night. Every part of him ached, yet he refused to surrender. He lived now in rhythm with the sea. Wake, scan the horizon, fish if possible. Catch rain when the sky was merciful. Sleep, though sleep often came in fragments, broken by fear of storms or predators. The ocean was his captor, but it was also his teacher. He learned to predict changes in the weather by reading subtle shifts in the wind. He noticed bird migrations and currents, small signs that whispered the secrets of survival. The man who had once left shore for a routine fishing trip was gone. In his place was someone harder, stripped of all softness, a man carved by salt and hunger. Still, he could not escape the relentless weight of loneliness. With no one left to share his pain, José found himself speaking more and more to the boat itself. He gave names to the birds that visited, treated turtles like messengers of God, and even whispered to the stars as if they were friends. Some might call it madness, but for him, it was survival. The mind, left too long in silence, must invent companions or risk shattering completely. One of the strangest moments came when a large shark trailed him for days, circling, waiting. At first, José feared it would strike at any moment. But as days passed, the predator became almost like a shadow, a constant presence. He began to speak to it, imagining it as a guardian instead of a threat. The line between reality and imagination blurred. But what mattered most was this: it kept him from falling into despair. And then, once again, hope flickered. Another ship appeared in the distance, closer than before. He screamed, waved, nearly threw himself into the sea to get its attention. But just like the last, it sailed away, too far to hear his cries. The rejection gutted him. For hours, he lay in the bottom of the boat, staring at the sky, his will crumbling. Why was he still fighting? Why had he been spared storms, sharks, and starvation, only to be ignored by salvation itself? That night, though, as stars blanketed the ocean, he found his answer. He thought of his daughter, of her smile, of her arms wrapping around him. That vision gave him strength. He swore into the darkness that he would not quit. If the world had turned its back on him, he would still endure. Because survival, for José, was no longer about rescue, it was about defiance. The sea had tried to take everything, but it had not taken his will. Months had passed, and José had reshaped himself into a man of the ocean. Yet isolation was beginning to cut deeper than hunger or thirst. Ahead lay more storms, more hallucinations, and a test of spirit that would push him beyond human limits. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where the true weight of time takes its toll. By the 7th month, José's ordeal had entered a new dimension. Time itself became his enemy. Survival was no longer measured in days or weeks. It stretched into seasons. The endless horizon offered no relief, no sign of change. It was as though he had been forgotten by the world, drifting in a purgatory between life and death. His body was frail but adapted. Hunger gnawed constantly. but he had grown skilled at catching fish with his bare hands or trapping turtles that wandered too close. Raw meat and blood had become normal, and his stomach no longer revolted at the taste. Rainwater remained his most precious treasure. He hoarded every drop he could collect, storing it in battered containers, knowing a dry spell could mean his end. Even with these skills, he lived on the edge of starvation and dehydration. What weighed heavier was the mental toll. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the slap of waves and the cries of gulls. To fight loneliness, José filled the void with stories. He spoke aloud to himself, recounting memories of his childhood in El Salvador, of the day he first went to sea, of the birth of his daughter. He replayed these stories over and over, until they became a lifeline, a way to anchor himself to the man he had once been. But isolation is cruel. At times, José was haunted by hallucinations, so vivid they blurred reality. He saw islands on the horizon, their green hills beckoning him. He heard voices in the wind, laughter, and conversations that vanished when he turned his head. Once, he swore he saw a boat filled with men waving at him, only to discover it was nothing but the play of light on the water. Each vision left him torn between hope and despair. Still, the ocean offered strange companionship. Dolphins swam beside him, leaping gracefully from the water, their presence almost playful. Seabirds rested on the boat, their black eyes watching him as if curious about this lone man adrift. José welcomed them all, speaking to them as though they were friends. He even thanked the fish he caught, whispering gratitude before eating, a ritual that gave dignity to his struggle. Despite the torment, a fire remained inside him. Some force, faith, stubbornness, or perhaps love kept him from surrendering. He told himself each morning, "I will see land again. I will see my daughter again." These promises became his anchor, his shield against the ocean's relentless attempt to erase him. But deep inside, another question gnawed at him. How many more months could a man endure this drifting prison before even the strongest will began to crawl by the 8th month? José's body bore the scars of his ordeal. His hair had bleached to a brittle yellow under the unrelenting sun. His skin was cracked, burned, and peeling, toughened like leather in some places, raw in others. His ribs protruded sharply, a visible reminder of the meager diet that barely kept him alive. Every movement was slower now, every task more exhausting. The raft itself had begun to decay. The once sturdy fiberglass hull was now battered by storms and salt, its edges fraying. Sharp barnacles clung to the bottom, slowing his drift and adding weight. Pieces of rope, tattered nets, and makeshift repairs told the story of a man constantly at work just to keep his fragile vessel afloat. The ocean had spared him this long, but the boat was breaking down, and José knew it might not last forever. Storms brought the greatest danger. When black clouds gathered and waves towered over him, José lashed himself to the boat and prayed. The sea roared like a living beast, tossing him about as though mocking his defiance. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his terrified face, while sheets of rain battered him until he could not tell where the ocean ended and the heavens began. Each storm left him trembling, but alive. And each time he survived, his belief in his own endurance grew. But storms also brought blessings. The downpours refilled his precious containers with fresh water. Some nights he lay on his back, mouth open, letting the rain fall directly into him. After days of thirst, the sensation was blissful, almost sacred. In these moments, José believed he was not abandoned. He believed that God or fate was giving him what he needed to continue. Loneliness, however, continued to gnaw at him. He longed for human touch, for a voice other than his own. He built imaginary conversations in his mind, picturing himself at home, telling stories to his family. At times, he spoke to his dead crewmate, Ezekiel, asking him what to do, waiting for answers he knew would never come. The silence after these conversations was the hardest to bear. And yet, every morning, José forced himself to work. He cleaned his boat. He checked his water. He set traps for fish. He refused to surrender to despair because he knew that if he allowed hopelessness to take root, it would consume him. But as another month drifted by, he wondered, would the world even remember him if he never returned? Or would the ocean simply erase his existence, as it had erased so many before him? By the 9th month, José's sense of time had nearly dissolved. The days blurred together, each sunrise indistinguishable from the last. He no longer marked dates, because the calendar in his mind had stopped functioning. What mattered was the rhythm of survival: fish, water, repair, sleep. That was all. Physically, he was withering. His body weight had dropped dramatically, leaving his limbs thin and weak. The act of pulling in a fish sometimes left him trembling with exhaustion. Cuts and sores festered slowly, healed poorly, and left scars across his arms and legs. Yet he endured, because the alternative surrender was unthinkable, to distract himself. José began constructing rituals. He prayed each morning, whispering words of gratitude even when he felt abandoned. He greeted the sunrise aloud, as if it were an old friend. At night, he told stories to the stars. He gave names to constellations, choosing them from memories of his family, so that every time he looked up, he felt connected to something beyond the waves. But as weeks turned into months, the hallucinations grew worse. He saw distant lights flickering on the horizon, mistaking them for ships. Once, he swore he smelled the scent of cooking tortillas, so real it made his mouth water, only for the illusion to vanish on the wind. These cruel tricks of the mind were perhaps the hardest to endure, because they reminded him of what he was missing. There were moments when despair nearly swallowed him. Some days, he lay motionless, staring at the endless sky, too weak to move, too hopeless to fight. But then hunger or thirst would jolt him back into action. His instincts overpowered his grief. Even when his mind betrayed him, his body demanded survival. One night, while drifting under a canopy of stars, José whispered into the darkness, "If I am meant to die, let it be quick. But if I am meant to live, give me strength to keep going." The waves answered with their eternal rhythm, and he chose once again to endure. 9 months at sea, longer than some wars, longer than the span of many lives' greatest struggles. Yet José still floated, suspended between despair and determination, waiting for a salvation that never seemed to arrive. By the 10th month, José's survival had become both instinct and madness. He was a man transformed, his body lean to the bone, his mind sharpened and fractured by solitude. The ocean had stripped him of everything unnecessary, leaving only a raw will to exist. Yet the longer he endured, the more surreal his existence became. Dreams and waking life began to blur. He dreamed of walking on land, of tasting fruit so sweet it made him weep, of hearing laughter echo through a room. But sometimes he could not tell if those visions came to him in sleep or while staring into the horizon. The line between reality and imagination thinned, and he feared losing himself completely. Yet survival demanded action. Every day, José forced himself to hunt. He stalked fish with the patience of a predator, sometimes diving into the sea despite the danger of sharks. He tore apart turtles with his bare hands, apologizing to them in whispers as he consumed their flesh. Blood stained his lips, his beard, his hands. This was not the life of a fisherman. It was the life of an animal, stripped to the core of instinct. The weather grew colder. Ocean currents carried him into regions where the winds were harsher and the nights were cruel. He shivered under thin rags, his body trembling from the chill. To warm himself, he curled into a ball at the bottom of the boat, whispering prayers into the dark. His faith became his only true shield, fragile but vital. Some nights he thought of his daughter more than anything else. Her face appeared to him, clearer than any hallucination. He heard her voice calling, "Papa, come back." It was these moments that broke him open, forcing tears he thought he no longer had. Yet they also reignited his determination. He had promised himself he would see her again. That promise could not be broken, and still doubt crept in. How many men had been lost to the sea before him, swallowed without a trace? What made him different? Was his survival luck or punishment? He did not know. What he knew was that he was still breathing, and that had to mean something. The 10th month passed like the others, a paradox of agony and triumph. José was alive, but barely. Each sunrise asked him the same question: how much longer can you endure? By the 11th and 12th months, José's ordeal reached a state that defied comprehension. He had been at sea for nearly a year, longer than many prisoners endure in captivity, longer than some lives are measured in joy. Yet still, the ocean carried him, a fragile speck drifting across its endless expanse. His body was gaunt, skeletal, but astonishingly functional. He had adapted in ways that defied medical logic. His muscles had shrunk, but his reflexes remained sharp when food appeared. His skin was darkened, blistered, and scarred, but it shielded him from the burning sun. His mind, though battered, had carved out strange systems of survival. He spoke to the sea creatures as companions. He prayed at dawn and dusk. He counted breaths when silence became unbearable. These rituals kept him tethered to the thread of sanity. Still, storms came like punishments. One night, towering waves crashed over his boat, threatening to overturn it completely. He clung to the hull with trembling arms, salt water choking his lungs, lightning slicing the sky. In that moment, he believed he would finally die. But when the storm passed, leaving him shivering and gasping, he realized he had survived yet again. And with survival came a crushing truth. He would have to endure more. His thoughts often drifted to death, not with fear, but with weariness. He imagined slipping quietly into the sea, letting the water take him, ending the endless suffering. But then his daughter's face would rise in his mind, and he would resist. It was not only his life he was fighting for. It was hers, too, the life she would have with a father, or without one. As the months dragged into a second year, José began to feel like a ghost. He no longer believed in rescue. He no longer believed anyone was searching. He existed for one reason only: to keep a promise to himself. Each heartbeat was defiance. Each breath was rebellion against the sea that wanted to erase him. And yet, deep inside, a flicker of hope refused to die. Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps it was faith. But José clung to it, because it was all he had left. By the start of the 13th month, José was no longer simply surviving. He was enduring the unimaginable. Few humans in history had lived adrift for so long, and his body bore the evidence of every brutal day. His beard hung in ragged clumps. His fingernails had grown thick and yellow, curling from lack of care. His feet were cracked and swollen, calloused by salt water and sun. He was no longer the man who had left shore. He was something else, entirely a creature shaped by the sea. And yet, even after more than a year lost, José's instincts remained sharp. He knew how to sense approaching rain by the way the horizon shimmered. He recognized the subtle shift of waves that hinted at nearby fish. His hands, once clumsy with nets, now snatched at prey with uncanny precision. What had once been desperate improvisation was now honed skill, born of necessity. But despite his adaptation, there were moments when despair came crashing over him like a wave. At night, staring into the endless black void, he sometimes wondered if he had already died. Was this drifting prison purgatory? Was he being punished for something he could not remember? He shook these thoughts away, but they lingered, whispering in the dark. José's connection to life came through memory. He clung to his daughter's image, summoning her face whenever hopelessness threatened to overwhelm him. He whispered her name like a prayer, imagining the warmth of her embrace. That single thought kept his soul from unraveling completely, and yet the sea seemed determined to break him. Sharks circled more frequently now, drawn by the scent of blood when he caught fish. Their fins sliced through the surface, reminders of how thin the line was between predator and prey. One wrong move, one slip into the water, and he would be devoured. He watched them carefully, treating them with wary respect, as if negotiating with death itself. The 13th month was proof that human endurance could stretch far beyond what anyone believed possible. But how much longer could even José's iron will resist the endless ocean, when each day felt like a battle against both nature and his own collapsing mind? By the 14th month, José's survival was beginning to feel like a paradox. He had proven that a man could live longer than anyone imagined adrift at sea, yet the cost was profound. Each day was not a triumph, but a negotiation with death, where the smallest mistake could mean the end. The isolation was a constant torment. José spoke to the boat as if it were alive, thanking it each morning for keeping him afloat. He gave names to the birds that landed on the raft, whispering to them like old companions. Sometimes he even sang softly, not for joy, but to remind himself that his voice still existed. Without these rituals, he feared silence would consume him. But survival required more than routine. José became an expert in patience. When fish swam near, he waited motionless for hours, striking at just the right moment. When rain clouds passed overhead, he opened every container he had, savoring the sound of fresh water filling them. Each success felt like a victory, not over the sea, but over despair itself. Yet his body continued to fail. His knees ached constantly, swollen from crouching in the cramped space. His back stiffened with every cold night. He often woke with cramps that left him paralyzed in pain, unable to move until the spasms passed. The smallest tasks, stowing a rope, lifting a fish, required monumental effort. Still, he pushed forward, because stopping meant death. One afternoon, while staring into the horizon, José thought he saw an island. Green trees swayed, and white sand sparkled under the sun. His heart raced, and he paddled furiously, only to watch it dissolve into mist. It was another cruel illusion, a mirage born of exhaustion. He collapsed in the boat, sobbing, his hope shattered again. But as night fell, and the stars returned, he whispered to himself the same vow he had carried from the beginning. I will not die out here. I will see my daughter again. It was not just a promise. It was the thread that bound him to life. By the 15th month, José's struggle had shifted into something almost supernatural. His survival no longer seemed bound by ordinary human limits. He had endured hunger that should have killed him, thirst that should have broken him, storms that should have drowned him. Yet still, he floated, alive against all odds. But this endurance came at a price. His body was a map of suffering. His skin, once sunburned red, was now a permanent bronze, cracked and leathery. His hair was bleached nearly white, a ghostly halo around his gaunt face. His eyes, once full of vitality, had grown hollow, but behind them burned a fierce spark of determination that even the ocean could not extinguish. The solitude pressed heavier than ever. José had spent over 400 days without human contact, and the absence gnawed at him relentlessly. He filled the void with conversations to the stars, to God, and to the memory of his family. He built an entire world of voices in his head, so he would not forget what people sounded like. Some days, he laughed out loud at imaginary jokes. Other days, he broke down, weeping into the silence. Yet survival demanded discipline. He continued to ration water carefully, even in times of abundance. He continued to fish, though his hands shook from weakness. He patched the boat with anything he could find, terrified that one split seam would doom him. His life had become a balance between instinct and willpower. Each decision a calculation of how to last one more day. There were moments of wonder, too. Once, a school of dolphins surrounded his raft, leaping and playing in the waves. Their presence filled him with a strange joy, as if they were guardians sent to keep him company. Another night, bioluminescent plankton lit up the sea, turning the water into a glowing field of stars. José watched in awe, whispering that he was not alone, that perhaps the ocean, in its vast cruelty, still had beauty to share. But as the 15th month closed, he faced the same unanswerable question. How long could this continue? Was he living on borrowed time, or was survival itself his destiny? By the 16th month, José had entered what felt like a second lifetime at sea. The man who had once boarded a small fishing boat off the coast of Mexico was gone. What remained was a figure carved by hardship, tempered by suffering, and hardened by an ocean that refused to release him. His body was frail but resilient. Every rib showed beneath his skin, and his arms trembled with even the simplest of tasks. Yet, when fish appeared, he still found the strength to strike, to hold, to eat. He was starving, but not broken. He was dehydrated, but not defeated. He had learned how far a human could bend before shattering. The raft was barely holding together. Salt water had eroded the seams, storms had battered its frame, and sun had weakened the materials. Each creak of the boat sent a chill through José, a reminder that his fragile sanctuary could fail him at any moment. He worked constantly to repair it, binding rope, patching holes, tightening knots, as though the vessel were a living being in need of care. Without it, he knew he was finished. In those long, empty days, he spoke more often to God. He did not pray for rescue anymore. He prayed for strength, for the courage to endure whatever was still ahead. He believed his survival had a purpose, even if he did not yet understand it. Perhaps he was meant to tell the world how far a human spirit could go. Perhaps he was meant to live simply because he had promised his daughter he would. Hallucinations remained a constant torment. Islands appeared, then dissolved. Ships emerged on the horizon, only to vanish like smoke. Sometimes, he even saw people faces staring back at him from the water. He reached for them, only to grasp empty waves. Each illusion cut into him, leaving wounds of disappointment deeper than hunger or thirst ever could. And yet, when the stars rose each night, José found peace. He traced constellations, whispering his daughter's name, imagining she was looking at the same stars from land. In those quiet moments, he felt tethered to the world he had left behind. And hope, thin but unbreakable, remained. 16 months at sea, 16 months of torment, 16 months of refusing to die. But for how much longer could he resist the weight of the ocean's endless trial? By the 17th month, José was no longer merely enduring. He was existing in a realm few humans had ever reached. Time had lost its meaning. He had survived through storms, starvation, thirst, and madness. Yet the horizon still stretched endlessly around him, as though the ocean itself were unwilling to let him go. His body had adapted in strange ways. His stomach, once pained by raw fish, now accepted it as routine. His hands were permanently calloused, hardened by salt and sun. His eyes scanned the sea with the precision of a hunter, detecting even the faintest ripple that might signal prey. He had become a man of the sea, shaped entirely by its demands. But beneath this adaptation lay exhaustion. 17 months of loneliness pressed on him like a weight that never lifted. His voice grew hoarse from speaking to himself, to birds, to God. Sometimes he forgot words in his native Spanish, searching for them in the silence before they returned. Isolation was eroding him piece by piece, threatening to unmake the man he had once been. Still, he clung to small victories. When a storm swept by, he collected rainwater and felt reborn. When a turtle wandered too close, he feasted and savored the taste of something more than fish. Even the sight of a dolphin leaping nearby filled him with wonder, a reminder that life still surrounded him, even in this desolate prison. His faith remained his anchor. He whispered scripture to himself, not as ritual, but as a lifeline. When despair grew too heavy, he prayed, and in prayer found the strength to lift his head again. He believed that his survival was no longer coincidence. It was destiny. He was meant to return, and yet the question lingered, more haunting with each sunrise. How many more months or years could a man survive like this before even destiny surrendered him to the sea? By the 18th month, José had drifted so long that the ocean felt like the only world he had ever known. Land seemed like a distant dream, something from another life. He had forgotten the scent of earth, the sound of traffic, the feel of shoes on solid ground. All that existed was the endless blue, the taste of salt, and the rhythm of waves. His survival had become almost mechanical. He caught fish with instinctive precision, gutted them with bare hands, and drank their blood when water ran low. He collected rain with a practiced efficiency, grateful for every drop. Even exhaustion could not stop him from repeating these tasks. They were the gears that kept him alive, the rituals that held death at bay. But his body was failing. His joints ached constantly, swollen from malnutrition. His vision blurred at times, spots dancing in front of his eyes when he rose too quickly. His teeth loosened, gums swollen and bleeding, signs of scurvy gnawing at him after so many months without proper nourishment. He knew his body was breaking, but he refused to surrender to weakness. Loneliness remained his cruelest enemy. He spoke to his daughter aloud, as though she were beside him. He told her stories of the sea, of dolphins that swam beside him, of storms that tried to swallow him. He imagined her laughter, her replies, and let those visions soothe him. Without them, his mind would have unraveled completely. One night, under a moonless sky, José looked into the black water and saw his reflection. For a moment, he did not recognize himself. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken, beard wild. He looked like a stranger, half man, half shadow. The sight shook him, but then he whispered, "I am still here." Those words, spoken into the void, became a declaration of defiance. 18 months at sea. 18 months of pain, hunger, solitude, and survival. Each day was a miracle, but also a curse. How much longer could he endure before the sea claimed what it had been demanding since the very beginning? By the 19th month, José had entered a strange rhythm of existence. Time, once measured in weeks or months, no longer mattered. Survival was the only clock he knew, each day ticking forward through hunger, thirst, and fragile hope. He had lived so long with the sea that it had become both captor and companion. His body was skeletal, yet still stubbornly alive. He moved slowly, with deliberate care, conserving every ounce of strength. The smallest mistake, a slip, a fall, a tear in the raft could end everything, so every movement was calculated. He no longer had the luxury of haste. Every task was survival distilled into its purest form. Storms continued to haunt him. When the horizon darkened and the wind howled, fear surged through his veins. Each storm carried the possibility of destruction, yet also the promise of salvation. He tied himself down and endured, praying as waves crashed over him, as lightning illuminated the terror in his eyes. When the storms passed, leaving him shivering and soaked, he felt both cursed and blessed. The loneliness by this stage was unbearable. José no longer just imagined conversations, he believed them. He saw faces hovering in the night sky, voices rising from the sea, people calling his name. He argued with them, laughed with them, wept with them. And though he knew, deep down, they were illusions, they were also his lifeline. Without them, he feared madness would consume him completely. One afternoon, he spotted birds circling above. His heart pounded. Birds meant land. He searched desperately, scanning the horizon until his eyes burned. But there was nothing. The birds drifted away, leaving him in silence once again. Hope, briefly rekindled, turned to ash. He collapsed in the bottom of the boat, whispering to himself, "Not yet. Not yet." 19 months lost at sea. Each one a victory, each one a torment. He had lived beyond the boundaries of human endurance, yet still the ocean refused to release him. Was he destined to die here? Or was survival itself the story he was meant to carry back to the world?